Hello everyone, I want to welcome you to tonight's Q&A session for the Inworld OPSPARC Challenge. Tori, as soon as you're ready, we're going to begin. We're filming this, actually recording this tonight so that this can be shared with others who are not able to be with us tonight. We want to be very respectful to our two guest speakers. Brooke Purinton is here from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, and Daryl Mitchell will be joining us a little bit later from the Strategic Partnerships Group at NASA NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. I also want to welcome Erin Majarowicz, who is here with us. She also is from the Strategic Partnerships the group within Goddard Space Flight Center, and she will be here helping both Brooke and Daryl with their presentations. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn over the mic to Brooke, and the purpose for tonight's Q&A session is to give you a little more information about what it takes to turn your inventions into real innovations and how you can really approach the marketing component of your spin-off technology. Thank you, Brooke, for being here with us. I'll be monitoring the slides for you, and please say hello and begin.
Hi, can you all hear me? All right. Well, I'm just going to go for it. Thank you, Sharon. So I am a primary patent examiner with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the basics of protecting your innovation and how you would do that through our intellectual property system. So back it up. Great. Oh. All right, intellectual property. So basically, like you have a physical property, you can have intellectual property, which is something you create with your mind, whether it's an invention or a trademark, a slogan. All of those are intellectual property because they're still yours. You created them, and as a government, we're invested in helping you protect that. So some of the ways we can protect our intellectual property are trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and patents. We're just going to go over those briefly today. Next slide. So a trademark, obviously I'm from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but I'm not working on the trademark side as much. A trademark is basically a word, a name, a symbol, a device, a sound, a color, like, you know, the Tiffany blue, any combination of those to identify goods and services of one seller to distinguish them from other sellers. So some of the trademarks that you see in this slide are probably super well known to you, right? The Apple logo is just a symbol. Skype is a word, but it's also a symbol, right? And these encourage trademark owners to provide goods and services that are consistently a certain quality. Like McDonald's, you go to any McDonald's, you're going to get basically the same burger, right? Thank you. Next slide. You don't have to register a trademark to have a slogan, to have a trademark color, or to have a special color unique to your brand. However, when you go and register them with our office, you do get some benefits. You can bring legal action in federal courts if you don't register them, you can't sue someone for trademark infringement. You can also use the R, the registered trademark symbol. You also can file your trademarks with customs, and then if someone else is trying to import, if you're Timberland and somebody else is trying to import a bunch of knockoff Timberlands, you have more rights with customs than you would otherwise. And we also publish them in the U.S. Trademark database. Thank you. Next. Copyrights. Obviously, our office doesn't do this. The Copyright Office in downtown DC handles most of the copyrights. It's basically a way to protect any original work of authorship, songs, books, movie, works of art. They have to be in a tangible medium, so songs, I think, often have to be written down. And you can use the copyright symbol as soon as you create any of those. You don't actually have to register with Library of Congress to do that. But if you're going to take someone to court for infringement, you must register them first. Thank you. Next slide. Trade secrets, which I think are super interesting, are a way outside of the legal system that you can protect your innovation, your intellectual property. But there are certain protections afforded for your trade secret. So a trade secret is any information that derives economic value from not being generally known or ascertainable. Some famous trade secrets include Coca-Cola. So if any of you have been to Atlanta, you can tour the Coca-Cola Museum, and they have a big vault that has what they claim is the recipe for Coca-Cola in there. Similarly, the WD-40, the lubricant, also has a recipe written down, and they've only taken it out of the bank vault it's stored in a couple of times since its invention in the 1800s. So you can see there are some of the famous trade secrets. In addition to those are the Google search algorithm. Nobody really knows how that works. Krispy Kreme donuts, my favorite, and KFC chicken coating. So next. So you can lose a trade secret if you don't prevent it from being disclosed. If you're just passing it out in a memo to all of your employees, sorry, sucks to be you, you're going to lose that trade secret. If you tell someone, or if you tell someone they can tell someone, you're going to lose it. So the Bush's baked beans guy really has to keep that golden retriever under wraps. You can also, if it's so simple that someone could reverse engineer it without knowing any of your secrets, you're going to lose your trade secret, as well as if they independently develop it. So as long as they don't actively steal it. If they do actively steal it, if somebody breaks into your company, goes into your vault, and takes out your recipe for WD-40, you will have a legal case against them. You can sue them under the Defense of Trade Secrets Act, which was passed in 2016 and signed into law by Obama. Next slide. So here's my bread and butter, which is patents. As I said, I am a patent examiner, and a patent is basically a property right. It's a short-term monopoly in exchange for the information you're going to give us about your invention. You come up with a great invention, awesome. We want you to tell us about it so that it never gets lost, that we'll always have that for posterity. In exchange for telling us about it, you're going to get 20 years of exclusive use where you have legal rights to it, and you can stop others from using, selling, offering for sale, importing the invention. And some of the types of patents that you might get, some of the types of things you might get a patent on is process for making something, a machine for making something or doing something, a manufacturing method of manufacture, and method of making, and any improvements thereof. Next slide. So the role of the patent system, like I said, is to protect your inventions by giving you legal rights, encourage inventions by saying you get these legal rights, you get this monopoly if you file for a patent, and then promote commercialization and application of invention. Are you going to spend money to get a patent and then not try and make that money back somehow? Hopefully not. But you can. You can give us your money. We'll take it. And then lastly, accelerate the commercialization of invention to the whole society. So you might not pay for the full protection. You don't have to pay for 20 years of protection. If you decide after 3 years you're done, great. Maybe somebody else will come and take it. They won't have patent protection, but they'll be able to use that information you gave us and commercialize on that. Next slide. So there are three types of patents, not main types. Utility patents are what most people think of when they think of patents. They're the ones I described initially: processes, machines, articles of manufacture, compositions of matter. You can see there it's 1969 and it's a space shuttle. Design patents cover just the way something will look. The iPhone case, the side, the size, that's covered under a design patent. So they're not going to have any utility, usefulness, besides how they look. It's an ornamental patent. And then lastly, plant patents. Not many people know this, but you can actually patent a plant if it reproduces asexually, so all of its children are going to be genetically the same, and have protection on that. So this is one of the Haas avocados that you see in a picture. Next. So if you are thinking about filing, maybe you have an awesome invention, maybe you want to put a patent application number down on a college application essay, this is how you should do it. The United States is a first inventor to file system. That means whoever puts the papers into our hands first will get it. We switched in 2013. We were a first inventor to invent system. We were first to invent, and we were the last country in the world that was first to invent. So you could bring your lab notebooks, you could bring all your notes, you could say, hey, I know that person filed first, but look at my notes. I filed before them. And that's not the case anymore. So you can file whenever you want. Just know that when you put your papers in our hands, that is your filing date. So other people will have to beat it. And if you only want U.S. protection, you can file 1 year after public disclosure. We give you a grace period now, so you can talk about it for a while. Next. So if you want to protect your invention, you come up with something awesome after this talk today, what you could do is search. So make sure your invention is actually invention. See if anyone else has the same idea already or has a patent on it. So Google Patents is a good way, a good resource for looking at patents and just fooling around and seeing what other people have done. You can file a provisional application if you want. Provisionals are just a placeholder, get you that date that you're going to use to show that you were the first to come up with this idea. And you have a year from filing a provisional to file the full patent. And then I'm assuming none of you are large corporations. If you are, this doesn't apply to you. But if you are all just filing for yourself, you get 75% off. Woo! It's still expensive, but it's not that bad. Next slide. If you do want to file and your mom or dad isn't a patent lawyer, and that's fine, you can always ask for help for lawyers who are going to work pro bono for free, or you can do it all yourself, DIY, which is called pro se. And then after you get this, yes. So if it looks and tastes exactly the same as a certain brand's product, that means, so you can't technically patent the look, or well, you can patent the look, you can't patent the taste. So if they have a different recipe, you can patent a recipe. If they have a different recipe that tastes almost the same or very similar, they can still make that. If it tastes exactly the same, if the first brand doesn't have a patent on that taste, then you don't have any protection over that. So you could create a trademark based on the look of your food, or you could create a patent for the recipe of your food. So those are the two protections you have. Does that help, Paige? If not, we can visit it. All right. All right, so this is what I do every day when I'm not working in the SPO office, having fun on Inworld, real world. And so basically, you send me your application. You have invented, tell me something you could invent, like a bike. Maybe you invent a bicycle and it's got wheels made out of titanium. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read all about how you describe this bike, why titanium wheels are awesome, how you have said this is my property. When you put out a patent, you say, I claim a bike made with titanium wheels. And I say, this is your claim. I understand your claim. I'm going to go try and find a bike made of titanium wheels. Or maybe you say, I have a bike with metal wheels, and I say, oh no, that's too broad. I found like bikes with metal wheels. And you say, well, when I said metal, I meant titanium. And so we go through that pyramid. We fight back and forth a little bit, and we end up with your invention and the claim, which lays out your property, and we're good. I say, great, awesome, you get a patent. That's basically what I do, except with a lot of lawyers and a lot more technical legal aspects. So if you want to be a patent examiner and you like arguing, it might be for you. Next slide. Oh, here's the process as laid out in a nice flow chart. So like I said, the first examination, you come in, you say, my bike has metal wheels. I say, no go. Second examination, you say, how about titanium wheels? I say, great. You get a notice of allowance on the right-hand side, which is where most of my applicants want to go. Next slide. This is just everything we talked about in a handy-dandy chart in case you want to look at it later. And do you have any more questions about any of the intellectual property topics we talked about today? Let me know. All right, great. Next slide, and I think that's my last slide. unless I have a surprise slide. Oh, I do have a surprise slide, but this was a game. So it's like, it was supposed to be trademarks, and then you label the trademarks, and then patents, and you guess some of the patents. So we can just go through that one later on if you want on your own. I mean, you can basically see all the excitement. It's secrets. Obviously, it's a secret. Next slide. There's our website. If you want to play that game on your own, on your computer, you can go to uspto.gov/kids, and you'll find games similar to the one I just showed you. Next slide. Yay. All right, we're done. I hope you basically know all the types of IP available to you now after you create your next invention. Thank you.
Let's stop for a moment and let me take any questions that you might have for Brooke before we turn the mic over to Daryl. I also want to make sure that you understand where the marketing plan comes in. You've looked at the two rubrics that are going to be used to assess your team worlds. Rubric 1 is the rubric that we are using this week for the formative assessment. It's also the rubric that will be used to identify the 5 finalists. You do not need a marketing plan for the rubric 1. But when you get to rubric 2, those teams that are selected as finalist teams, it is important, and there is a component that's going to be assessed if you have a realistic marketing plan. With that in mind, all of the information that Brooke has just shared with you will be very important as you are trying to create that marketing plan. So before we make a switch over to Daryl, are there any questions that you would like to ask Brooke? Brooke or Daryl, if either one of you could answer Subramanian's question. He's interested in what would be some essential elements of a complete business or market plan.
Actually, this is Daryl. I have some of that information in my presentation, so I will be touching on that later on in my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Daryl Mitchell, who is a colleague in the NASA OPSPARC Challenge and a friend stationed at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Daryl works within the Strategic Partnership Group, as does Aaron. So the two of them are important members and colleagues within the NASA OPSPARC Challenge. Daryl, you're on. You can take the mic.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon. Can everyone hear me? Yes, good. Yes, thanks again, Sharon. I've always had the great pleasure of working with Sharon since we combined OPSPARC and Inworld, and it's been a great collaboration. And one of the reasons that we ended up combining the two contests was because there was some synergy between the two in terms of Sharon would incorporate a requirement in the Inworld contest, wanting people to identify tech transfer and commercialization opportunities for their designs, which was very intriguing. And so it was a natural fit. So we're excited to work together again for, what's this, the 4th year we've worked together, I think. Again, I am with the Strategic Partnerships Office. And next slide. So I just wanted to kind of list out what my objectives were to talk to you today about. Primarily, I want to, you've already kind of thought about a problem and a possible technology to solve it. And I'm assuming, you've done some thinking about how that technology can solve the problem. That's a very important thing, and a key aspect of what we do here in the Strategic Partnerships Office for their tech transfer responsibility. But there is more to it than just solving the technical problem. It has to eventually get out into the world for it to be used to become a spin-off or an innovation. So, for that to happen, there are business elements that have to be addressed. And I want to talk a little bit about business plan and marketing plans and things like that that you could be thinking about as you're doing this project. If you were really starting a company around a project, you'd probably go into more detail than I'm going to get in here today in 30 minutes. But this will give you a kind of a basis to start thinking about with your projects as you're formulating your final presentation. So part of that, understanding what those business considerations are and why they're important, and understanding, Brooke just told you a lot about intellectual property, the different kinds, different properties, what's required to access each one. And I want to talk a little bit about what's the actual value to the business proposition of those, or at least give you a framework to start thinking about what is the actual value of that in your particular application that you're looking at. And then finally, going back to the earlier question, talk a little bit about business and marketing plans. Next slide. So who is that guy behind the curtain? I won't spend a lot of time talking about me, but just to give you some indication about who I am, as Sharon said, I am with the Strategic Partnerships at Goddard Space Flight Center. I am the Deputy Chief of that office. I've actually been with NASA Goddard just short of forever. I'm coming up on 28 years. I started out, I had my educational background. I had a bachelor's and a master's in applied physics and an MBA with focus on technology management. I worked briefly as a nuclear chemist before I came to NASA. And when I came to NASA, I was an electromagnetic compatibility engineer. So I was looking at satellites and kind of evaluating and helping make sure that when you turn different systems on the satellite, that they don't interfere with each other. And then about, coming up on just a little over 20 years ago, actually I came to what is now the SPO, and I've been doing monitoring and managing a portfolio of technologies at SPO for 20 years now. So I've seen quite a bit of different companies coming through and a lot of different technologies and seen how some of these scenarios play out for companies. And so hopefully I can share a little bit of that with you today and answer any questions you might have. Next slide. This next slide I'm not going to dwell on. I just put a few key terms that you might want to consider if you're not already familiar with them to go back and reference. This is certainly not exhaustive, but it kind of touches on some of the main topics that I'm going to talk a little bit about here this afternoon. Next slide. So, as I said before, finding a technical solution is an important step to solving a problem, but to basically become a spin-off or an innovation where it goes out and benefits the broader public, ultimately somebody has got to benefit from it. And typically for it to be sustainable, that usually has to involve some kind of an economic benefit. Translation, there has to be a way that you can set up a business around it so that you can generate revenue, continue generating, creating this technology for people to acquire. Although there are some business models where, if there's a very strong social benefit, there are nonprofits and other types of structures where you might not actually be making a profit, but you can work off of grants and other opportunities to still bring the technology to the public. But that obviously is a very different business model than someone who's selling it for a profit as their main source of revenue. And key part of that is going to be having a business plan wrapped around that. So going to the next slide. So I know when I was in high school and possibly even college and probably when I first came to NASA, I don't think I really had an appreciation for how hard the business aspect really is. My focus was very much on the technical challenges and the difficulties of understanding the math and the engineering that went behind these things. But over time, I've come to appreciate that the business component is probably just as hard, in some cases potentially harder than the technical challenge. I've put a list of references here. You can go and you can read up about commercialization, different theories on commercialization, and some information about how hard it is. Things like only 1 in 10 companies succeeds at sustaining growth. It's a difficult proposition, and to succeed, there's a lot of preparation that's required. There's no guarantees, But if you do the proper footwork, you certainly put yourself on a better footing. Be like the people in this cartoon down there in the lower right-hand corner, who built this incredibly awesome, complex, huge piece of technology, and then, okay, now let's let the marketing people figure out, what it's good for. It would be better to actually have an idea of what it is, the market that you're going after, what that market is, and what the key drivers are that allow you to be successful as a seller in that market on the front end, rather than trying to figure it out on the back end. Your odds can go up dramatically of becoming successful. So next slide. So the question, you're probably asking yourself now. If you're not, you should. So how do I get started? There's a lot in front of you, kind of like this guy standing in front of the board. There's a lot of different information. There's all the technical information, and there's this business stuff that Daryl's going to talk about. Where do I get started? Well, with the business stuff, I think the key starting point is to really understand your technology and the solution that it offers and where it applies, what the true value of it is. So that then you can plan, that kind of sets the stage for figuring out what the best business strategy is for your technology and in the fields that you're actually going to pursue. I've listed a couple things to consider. One of the first things I would recommend that you try, if you're not familiar with it already, is SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, I'm not talking about a bunch of police officers in combat gear and assault rifles. We're talking about, it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a question. I guess it depends. I would actually say it depends on your business model, but in some cases, you might want to understand the market before you file your patent if you have that luxury. If you haven't disclosed it, Brooke talked about if you disclose it publicly in the U.S., you have a year to file. If you don't have some time constraint in that manner, I think it's a good idea to actually try to understand your market as best you can, because maybe how you protect your intellectual property, maybe a patent isn't the best way for your particular technology. Maybe a trade secret is a better way. If it's a process, a lot of times trade secrets handle that more efficiently because they also give you more time than a patent does. Or maybe a copyright if it's software. So understanding the market actually can determine whether or not you even bother with filing a patent. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I'm going to go on. Okay, great. You're welcome. So getting back to how do I get started, again, I would recommend SWOT analysis as a way. SWOT analysis can be, very simple, or you can make it very complex, but it's a good way to get yourself started in thinking about your project. So the next thing in understanding your project is what type of innovation is it? That might inform how you go about approaching the market based on which one of the four types of innovation that we're talking about, and what is the intellectual property position, going back to the question we were just discussing. Is there a patent already? Are you licensing it, or should it be a trade secret? Things like that. And then once you get done, you understand that, then you can go in and start developing your business plan. And then, ultimately, you want to do some kind of evaluation. I've kind of listed ROI as a simple, return on investment as a simple measure that can be kind of looked at. There's obviously much more in-depth ways of doing it. But in the end, you have to see, if I make the effort and commit the resources that it's going to take to develop this technology into a product for people to use, is it going to, do I have a good feeling, or am I confident that there's going to be a sufficient market and I'm going to make enough revenue that I can keep my company going, and that I'm not going to be losing money? All right, next slide. Okay, so SWOT analysis. I've put a kind of a basic outline for a SWOT chart here. And again, as I said, SWOT just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is a very basic business tool. You can also use it to look at your technology from a technical standpoint in some ways as well. It's not just a business tool. And when you're doing it, as you're addressing these items, it's kind of filling out and forcing you to think about all the different factors that will come into play with your technology, whether it's the business terms or the technical. And one thing you have to keep in mind is, as you're defining each of these 4 quadrants, there's certain things that there's certain perspectives that you have to keep in mind, which you've kind of listed on the outside of the 4 quadrants. If you look at it, you can see when you're looking at strengths and weaknesses of your technology or your business model, whichever it is, you're looking at internally strengths that come from internal to your organization or your group, or weaknesses that are internal, things that you have control over.
Daryl, do you see the question? Yes. Subramanian?
Yep, I'm reading it now. I think there's value in it, in looking at it at the early stage, absolutely. I think the thing you have to think about at that point is, how much detail do you put in it, because there's a lot of things that are still uncertain, but I think if you put your best estimate of these things in there, it may help you guide you as you go to mature the technology. You can use a SWOT to help you determine maybe what's the best path to try to mature that technology to get it out of that nascent stage. Or is it even worth pursuing this technology, or should we move on and try something different? So I definitely think doing a SWOT up front can benefit you. Did that answer your question? Yep. Okay, great. So going back to the kind of the SWOT chart, when you're looking at strengths and weaknesses, you're thinking of strengths and weaknesses as internal, originating from internal to your organization, things you can control. When you're looking at opportunities and threats, those are things that come external to your organization. And then if you look at the vertical direction, when you're looking at strengths and opportunities, you also have to factor in strengths and opportunities are obviously some things that are helpful to helping you achieve what it is you're trying to do, whereas weaknesses and threats obviously are harmful. The verticals, the helpful and the harmful, are kind of obvious by the names of the quadrants, but you really should keep in mind, keeping the strengths and weaknesses internally focused as well as the external focus for the opportunities and the threats. I won't go through them, but I've listed some questions that might kind of be the basis to help you start thinking about what your questions are. You should consider in order to start filling out your own SWOT chart. And you can look at those, and these aren't, you can modify these, you can come up with completely different ones, but those are just kind of intended to give you something, to give you a little bit of guidance on how you should be thinking about filling out those specific quadrants. And once you have it figured out, then you have a framework, and I think you'll find if you've done a good job, you'll have a better understanding of, what your technology is, what your business is, and how you need to move forward. Next chart. All right. So, one of the things to keep in mind that I mentioned when you're looking at when you're doing your SWOT chart and when you're actually thinking about your marketing plans is, maybe if you're able to judge, what type of innovation does your technology fall into? There's different ways of carving it up, but I think, personally, I find that the one that I think really captures it the best, in my personal opinion, is that there are basically 4 types of innovation. You have incremental innovation, which is kind of the, by far and away the most common type of innovation that happens. And that's kind of denoted in that graph on the right-hand side by the size of, the purple incremental region. Those are small improvements that are kind of additive, that keep moving the product and improving it a little bit each time. And that's where the vast majority of innovation actually comes from. But there's also breakthrough innovations. And those, they can make They are major breakthroughs in technology that basically kind of move the product way ahead of anything that's already out there. There's also disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation basically is a case where you have a technology that has been developed to the point where it's overly complex for the original solution it was intended for. And basically a disruptive innovation, it happens when some new development occurs where, typically you're able to lower the cost or to purchase the technology, lower the cost of it, make it cheaper, and start up a whole new market. Might be something like disposable, throwaway cell phones. Or an example they use is Dell computers. When personal computers got to be very, very expensive, Dell came up with a model where they can, provide the functionality that people needed at a much lower cost, and they just totally disrupted that marketplace. And finally, you have the game-changing innovations that kind of I think what a lot of people think of in terms of these brilliant flashes of insight, which rarely are as out of the blue as they're portrayed sometimes. But these are innovations that are so game-changing that you're basically creating whole new markets around a product that didn't exist before. So that can influence if the market that you're looking at, you're basically creating it. That can play a big part in your business plan. So depending on where you are on these different types of innovation, can have a big impact on what type of marketing and positioning strategy that you have. Next slide. All right. So you're looking at all this stuff, and when you're looking at your technology and trying to evaluate it, in fact, you're kind of grading it, just like your product for this competition is going to get graded, or your teacher's grade, your class assignments. Well, you need to be honest and open and objective as you can be anyway. Sometimes it's hard, but and grade your product, your technology, your innovation as well, and look at different factors that kind of give you an indication of, where do I stand with this technology? Is the technology a concept only, or is it something that's ready to go? If it's a concept, that means you're looking at your business plan. There's going to be a lot of development and potentially a lot of cost there, as opposed to something, if you're evaluating a technology that's pretty close to ready to go to market. Market attractiveness. What does the market look like for the different sectors that this technology might play in? Is it basically a wide open market with very little competition because it's a game-changing technology, or is it a well-established market with a lot of big players and it's hard to enter? Those are important considerations. How are you going to deal with that? Invention protection. This is where, going back to the question that was asked a little while ago, and thinking back to all the great information that Brooke shared with you, you really need to think about what intellectual property you have, and what in some cases, what intellectual property do you really need? In the case of, if you're licensing a technology, obviously, if it's from NASA, it's either a copyright or a patent, typically. But even if you're taking a technology that isn't patented and creating a spin-off for it, could there be a patent for your? Is there something that you did that raises level to invention that maybe you could get your own patent for it? Is the market one where you really need your patent? Is the technology, is it a process? Maybe you don't need a patent. Maybe it's a trade secret. There's, looking at what kind of intellectual property really suits the market as well as the application and the type of technology that you have is something to think about it too. And then ease of use and timing are also very important considerations. Ease of use is kind of obvious. How easy is this technology for the person who's going to purchase it to use, or how easy is it for you to prepare it for them? And then, timing. A lot of times in this office I've seen over the years, we've had a lot of technologies, because we do things that are kind of, focused out there and very unique applications. We've had lots of cases of stuff where nobody has a crystal ball that's 100% accurate. And sometimes, we have to make an estimate of whether to patent something or not based on all the information, but it's not certain. And there's been plenty of cases where we've patented technologies and gone out and tried to license it to companies. And basically, what happened is we found out this technology is just ahead of its time. Basically, the performance, it could be the performance is greater than there's any commercial need for at this time. Maybe 10 years from now, we'll need that performance. Right now, we don't. Or maybe the technology to manufacture that product might not be as amenable as it is, 10 years from now. So, that one's kind of hard to judge, except in hindsight. But to the extent that you can kind of get a feel for that, it's something to consider. So as you're doing your product, think about these things and think about what kind of grade would you give your spin-off idea in your project? Where does it sit on the spectrum? Next. Okay. So finally, I'm going to get to talking about the business and marketing plans. And one question some people may ask is, why do I need a business plan? And there's probably plenty of answers to that, but I've kind of put 5 key points here. And I think that the overarching answer is kind of pointed out in this little quote from Alice in Wonderland in the corner that if you don't have a destination in mind where you want to go, then you don't know how to get there. So what a business plan does is it lets you sit down and figure out where you want to go with your technology or where you need to go with your technology, and you put a plan together on how you're going to get there and what you're going to do if something happens that you get off the path at some point, how to get back on. And then once you have this and you have a direction and a guidance, this will help you as you go forth when you're going out to get funding. Obviously, you're going to need money to start your company up or to develop your product. Having a good business plan makes it much more likely that you're going to be able to attract an investor to invest their money. They see you as a good risk. It looks at it lets you communicate and where your company is going to be with members of your company as well as investors. It helps you manage your cash flow. A lot of businesses, we talked about, it's very hard. Many businesses fail, and not always because they're unprofitable, but because they can become insolvent, where they're unable to pay their debts as they fall due because they haven't planned properly for it. If you're a company that gets paid in cash, then you can pay your debts as they come due. But if you're taking payments on credit, then you're not going to get your money until after some period of time. You need to think about that because people are still going to be sending you bills, and you need to pay your bills. So a business plan is a key piece of giving you the strategic focus and figuring out which way your company is going to go and keeping you on course and what your priorities are going to be. Next slide. So business plans, there's lots of guidance out there. You can do a search on the web. I've listed some of the key things that I think you should have. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list. One thing I think I may have forgotten to put in here is, it's good to have an executive summary, but you should have an overview of your company. It's important to have an industry analysis. You need to understand the markets that you're competing in, and who you're competing with. You need to understand your customers, who they are and what they want. If you develop a product that your customers don't want, you've wasted your time and your resources. You have to look at your competitors, do a competitive analysis to some degree. What are their strengths relative to yours? What are their weaknesses relative to yours? You may develop a very high quality product, but if every one of your competitors also has a very high quality product, it's more of a requirement rather than an advantage. So you might need something additional to differentiate yourself. Marketing plan is definitely a key, and I think for this assignment, Sharon has assigned you guys in the second phase to do a marketing plan. And it makes it obvious that it is something that you need to think about. But when you're developing a business, and even especially in the very early stages, thinking about your marketing plan is definitely a key consideration. What are your products and services? What are all these markets we're going on? How are you going to distribute them? You need to know these in order to prepare yourself to compete out there in the market. You need an operations plan to know how your business is going to operate, and what the issues are you might face there and how you're going to deal with them. The management team, what their experience is, if they have any. This can come into play both in day-to-day operations, long-term planning, as well as getting investment. Obviously, when you go out to get investors, they're going to be much more inclined to want to invest money in an experienced management team than a team that has never actually started up a company and taken it to completion. And finances are always important. If you can't articulate how your company is going to make money, whether it's through sales and profits reinvested into the company, or if it's going to be a nonprofit and you're going to operate off of grants and donations, they're very different entities, and that affects your cash flow and your ability to meet your obligations. So you really need to look at that financial plan and figure out how it's going to work for you, and before it comes back to bite you. Next slide. So again, since it is part of your assignment for this contest that Sharon has assigned you, I put some ideas here. A marketing plan can be as simple or as detailed as you want. Kind of somewhere you want to be somewhere in between that top cartoon, which you can't read, it says great plan, where you get some more details, versus the bottom one, which is a ridiculous amount of detail that no one could even begin to decipher. You want to be somewhere in the middle of those. But here's I've listed some key items that you really want to think about for this project, I think, as you're looking at, justifying the business plan for moving forward with your particular idea for a spinoff. Next slide. So I would just want to give one quick suggestion. You guys may have heard of an elevator pitch. The idea is that if you find yourself, you're trying to fund your company, and suddenly you find yourself in an elevator with that investor you've been trying to get a meeting with, who's been ignoring you for months, and you've got 30 seconds to explain to him why I should fund you. What would you say? The key there, the key lesson there is you need to be able to effectively communicate your technology, what it does, why it's a good idea, who it benefits, and you'll be able to do that very concise and quickly. And so I've listed kind of 4 key components of the body of putting together, a concise description of your technology that you can use when you're telling people about it. Next slide. So I'm almost done here. This is my last slide. So I'm referring to it as making the go, no-go decision. And I mentioned up in the very beginning, I'm listing a formula for calculating return on investment. It's basically the ratio of the money gained or lost from investment relative to the amount of money invested. And what you're looking at here is, if I put this money in, am I going to get a suitable return on that money to make it worth my while to move forward with this business and developing this technology, as well as investors to put money into it. So basically, if you look at that picture out in the upper right-hand corner, if you're looking at, generically, your technology in terms of cost versus benefits, you want to get over there in that lower right quadrant where you're getting, a lot of benefit for minimal cost, as close to that as you can, obviously. So you can kind of use this as a rough guideline, and there's far more complex ways to do this, but to give yourself an idea of, is this something that makes business sense, or should I look at another solution? And below, I've listed there's advantages and limitations to ORI. Advantages are it's very versatile and it's very simple, and hence the reason it's so versatile. But the limitations is it doesn't account for things like, over what period of time are you getting a return on that investment? Is it, if you get the same amount of money over 1 year that you got over 4, that's a little different return on investment, but you have to factor that in. And so the other limitation that kind of highlights then is that, if you're not careful about how you construct your return on investment and how you compare it to among your different choices that you're evaluating, you can easily manipulate it to get the results you want, or get results that may be a little deceiving. So you have to be careful about how you apply it, but it's a very powerful, simple tool to kind of look at, does it make sense to keep going forward with this project, or should I look at another technology or another business opportunity? And next slide. And with that, I am done talking at you, and I just want to wish you all good luck. I'm excited to see the results of all your hard work, and I really hope that, I look forward to seeing, some of you here at Goddard in Greenbelt, Maryland for the award ceremony in June. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those. From my perspective, I don't think that's necessary for the competition. Unless if you are really in your spin-off idea, we would be certainly happy to entertain that. We'll take a look at what you did, and we can look at that. But I wouldn't think it would be a requirement for the contest, unless Sharon has different guidance. I would think that wouldn't have to be a requirement.
No, I agree with Daryl. We've tried to lay out for you what would be the authentic steps and the approaches that would be necessary, and we do want you to consider a marketing plan as if you were truly to take your spin-off idea into a marketing capacity. And Daryl's office, he's very sincere in saying that if we find a spin-off that we believe could actually make it into the competitive market, we will do what we can to help you with that from the NASA side of it too.
Okay. Yes, actually I did. So yes, we do. Actually, we have something like a CRADA, and we have CRADAs. So it's a 2-for-1 thing, I guess. Yes, CRADAs are an instrument that pretty much every other federal laboratory, the U.S. federal laboratory, uses to work with other organizations. For those who aren't familiar with it, NASA also can use CRADAs. We have a special authority in NASA to enter into an agreement with industry. We call them Space Act agreements. There are 1 or 2 kind of small differences that between the two, but generally they're fairly similar. So yes, we can do CRADAs and or Space Act agreements.
And Jamarty, your question about the teams graded on the types of innovations. Carefully look at rubric 1. That's the rubric that, when used, will select the finalists. And what we're really interested in is your innovative ideas. We're also interested in if they are using authentic math and science in support of whether they are not science fiction, but they truly could be something that would be an actual spin-off. And so we're also then interested in the modeling that's done, so you can demonstrate for us with 3D virtual modeling what this spin-off will look like. I very much want to thank Brooke and Daryl and Aaron, representing us from NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. And I also want to thank Tori, who is there from NIA in Hampton, Virginia. Dave and Margaret are supporting the back end of all of our work up in Ithaca, New York. And I want to thank all of the students and the mentors who have joined us today for this presentation. The PowerPoints will continue to be here in this auditorium You can come and look at them if you'd like to, as well as Tori will be editing and kind of posting for us this video recording, and I will send that out to all of the team leaders so that they can share it with their high school students as well. Thank you all. If there are no last questions, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email Dave or myself to make sure that you are prepared to be doing your very best. Good night, everybody.